Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show, Election 2020. This is our special program on Amendment B, the proposal to repeal the constitutional Gallagher Amendment. First, before we start the actual conversation, I want to thank the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment for reviewing our COVID protocols. And so you'll see the look and feel of this program is a lot different than what we normally do because we've socially distanced everyone. And my guests seem to be delighted that they're far away from me, by the way. And we've taken a number of other measures as well. Most importantly, I want to make sure that everybody is registered to vote, and we'll put different graphics out for you to do that. But in Colorado, there's still time to register to vote. You actually can even register to vote on Election Day, and you can cast a ballot as late as Election Day. But I'd like to encourage everyone to vote as early as possible. Get your ballots in. They have to arrive by 7 p.m. on Tuesday, November 3rd. So you also can watch a number of our election programs, so please feel free to go to harbertv.com/elections, and we'll have all of our shows there as well. Let's get started on the Gallagher Amendment. I first would like to introduce Kent Thiry, the former CEO of DaVita, who is a proponent of the measure to repeal the amendment. Kent, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me here.
Of course, you know, you're just as well known for a number of civic issues. You've really changed the landscape here in Colorado. Unaffiliated voters can vote in primary elections, for example, and we have Kent to thank for that. So thank you, Kent, by the way.
You are very welcome.
And a number of other measures, which we could spend the whole show talking about, so I won't. And teaming up with Kent in favor of the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment, in favor of Amendment B, is State Senator Jack Tate. Jack, thanks for being here as well.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great having you on the show. And in opposition to the repeal of the measure, in opposition to the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment, which is in our Constitution, our Colorado Constitution, is the campaign manager to fight the repeal, opposed to the repeal, my old friend, well, he's not that old, Clay Vigoda. Clay, great having you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.
And last but not least, our fourth guest, who also is opposed to the repeal of the measure, is none other than former state senator, former city auditor, and the actual author of the original amendment, Dennis Gallagher. Thanks, Dennis.
It's a joy to be with you as we enter into the lean and slippered pantaloon, as Shakespeare might say, or that ends this strange, eventful history. So I'm looking forward to being here and talking about this.
Well, it's always great to see you. And of course, I got to meet Dennis, I won't say how many years ago, but it was quite a while. So, Jack, I'm going to start off with you. Tell me about the proposal and why people should vote for Amendment B.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I'll just make a brief comment, but I'd like to turn the introductory remarks over to my friend KT. Real simply, Amendment B is a clean repeal of the Gallagher Amendment. We passed it through the General Assembly via Senate Concurrent Resolution 1 with strong bipartisan support, with 75% of the legislators in the General Assembly voting for it. And being a clean repeal, we only need 50% of the vote of the electorate, or I should say a 50% majority to remove the Gallagher Amendment from the Constitution. I appreciate Senator Gallagher being here defending his namesake. I'm sure if this were the Tate tax cut, I might be similarly so inclined. Again, thank you for having this opportunity to talk. But KT, who's chair of the campaign to make this initiative happen, is best suited to have that discussion.
Kent, please.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Dennis and Clay, for being here. And Aaron, in particular, thank you for having us all here to discuss this issue. With all due respect to the senator and how much sense this may have made 40 years ago, like so many things that made sense 40 years ago, it just doesn't work well now. It's unfair. it's out of date, and it's destructive to our society and to our economy. And ironically, even most of our opponents agree that it has those faults. A few quick points on the good things that will happen if we do pass Amendment B and repeal the Gallagher Amendment. If we do, number one, our residential taxes are the third lowest in America right now. That's great. We should celebrate that. We should honor it. And Amendment B protects it by freezing those rates. Number two, Amendment B ensures that the rule of Tabor still applies. The rule of Tabor is still the law of the land, black and white. No state legislature can raise a residential assessment rate or a commercial assessment rate. Only the people can do that if they want to. And so voting for Amendment B helps ensure that Tabor retains its spot as the law of the land. Number three, we stopped hurting small business. Back 40 years ago, the rates that were paid were about the same, and the amount of property value was about the same. Now, if you're a small business person, you pay 4 times the amount that a residential homeowner does. This is crushing when we want our small businesses to be still the soul of our communities and the engine for our economy. Instead, they have to not hire people or even let people go. They can't offer a raise. They can't offer health care benefits because they're crushed by some of the highest property taxes for small business in all of America. And lastly, our rural districts, or more broadly, the 1/2 of our counties who are just stable. They're not growing fast like Denver and Boulder. Those well-to-do communities are going to do just fine. They are the ones that are going to have increasing property tax collections under the Gallagher formula. It's the other half of Colorado that is damaged, that has the same number of hospital calls, the same number of ambulance calls, the same number of students, and suddenly, because Denver and Boulder are taking a bigger share of the state's tax collection, the most well-to-do populations and homeowners benefiting, suddenly the other half of Colorado suffers these tax collection hits. They didn't ask for them, they didn't vote for them. Their hospitals, their firefighters, their police, their first responders are all hurt. This is the reason there is this broad bipartisan coalition seeking to repeal what was probably a great idea 40 years ago.
So, Clay, I'd like you to start off a response to that. But Kent, I'd like you to just talk a little bit more and maybe clarify that last point, which is how this affects some of our smaller rural counties in terms of impacts on schools, impacts on fire departments, et cetera. Could you give people maybe a little more detailed idea of what's actually happening in those small counties that those of us in the metro area just really may not be aware of?
Yeah, there is a reason that Republicans and Democrats outside of Denver and Boulder are overwhelmingly in favor of this repeal. And that is because the other half of Colorado, the non-Denver Boulder part, gets crushed by losing tax collection revenue. And suddenly they face a terrible choice. Either we let firefighters go, we let teachers go, we close down a hospital wing, we have slower ambulance response time, we can't put enough people out there to fight a fire. You can see the cumulative effects of Gallagher because you can't see our mountains. That all of that happens. Those voters didn't ask for it, they didn't request it, they didn't vote for it. Then they either have to cut those services or raise their own local taxes to make up for what is missing from the state. And when they do that, Gallagher forces them to charge small business 4 times the rate. And if we don't repeal it this year, it jumps to 5 times, and then it will go to 6 and 7. It is literally an unsustainable policy that wreaks havoc. This is why almost all non-urban legislators, both parties, want Gallagher repealed.
Clay, jump in, please.
Well, I appreciate you having me here, Aaron. And I guess I want to get away from campaign rhetoric, and I want to talk about the hard facts that the tax administrator of the state of Colorado has stated. And using her facts, there are 4 things about Amendment B which are clear. Number 1, Amendment B is a tax increase on homeowners. It will ultimately be the largest tax increase the state of Colorado has ever seen. Number 2, it adversely affects renters and makes affordable housing harder. Number 3, by unhinging Gallagher from the Constitution, it puts the legislature in a place where they will start to be able to give larger and larger tax breaks to businesses. And number 4, the whole issue about special districts and the idea that Amendment B will help them is a total fallacy, because there's not going to be any extra monies, as even the proponents say. The first thing on the taxes. The proponents of Amendment B like to talk about tax rates. But I think that what you really need to talk about is dollars in your pocket and how many of those go out to paying taxes. According to the tax administrator, if Amendment B passes, in the very first year, that will be $450,566,182 out of homeowners' pockets in the first year. And that goes on every year past that and only goes higher as residential property rates continue to rise. $2.25 billion in the next 5 years. And let's say this goes on forever until the voters decide that they've had enough. It makes it harder to do, with higher property taxes, makes it harder to do affordable housing, makes renting more difficult and higher. And I always find this argument about business, almost amusing, because at the end of last year, U.S. News and World Report said that Colorado had the 4th best economy for business in the country and the #1 performing economy. So the idea that big corporations, oil and gas interests, and businesses in general are being hurt by the Gallagher Amendment is a fallacy. Are small mom and pops hurt on this? Yes, it is. And there are ways that the legislature could have gone forward to not treat small businesses the way they treat large businesses and oil and gas interests. But they didn't do that. Instead, they went after the only constitutionally authorized break that the average citizen gets in this state. And that's where the issue really becomes. As Kent noted, there has to be significant tax reform in the state of Colorado. But it's not about the Gallagher Amendment. It's about Tabor Amendment, it's about Amendment 23, and it's about Gallagher and the way they all three work together. And comprehensive tax reform is something I know that Senator Gallagher have been for decades. But starting the tax reform by going after homeowners makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And because of the decrease in values that are going to be coming, that the tax administrator projects are coming in 2021 with the tax assessment, Amendment B does nothing to drive more money to special districts, to our fire districts, our library districts. That's a fake argument, and it's a dog whistle to get people to respond to it, but it just isn't going to happen. And in actuality, the state will probably see $1 billion less in taxes from non-residential property, or not the state, but special districts and the counties and the school districts. So for those reasons, Amendment B makes absolutely no sense in the middle of a global pandemic when 500,000 Coloradans are either unemployed or underemployed. And as of August, nationwide, 32% of the people in this country couldn't pay their mortgage either on time or in full. This is the wrong time to be going after something like this, and starting with homeowners is the wrong way to do it.
So, Dennis, I'd like you to jump in, but Clay, you mentioned other options, and just kind of as a sidebar, I'd be interested. What do you think the General Assembly could do to help small businesses that they didn't?
Well, I think that there's a number of ways to get rid of the places where Gallagher falls down. Right now, there are only two categories. There's residential property owners and there's non-residential property owners. Treating people who have second homes or who are in $1 million homes the same way you treat people in $100,000 homes makes absolutely no sense. Breaking that into different categories makes sense. Same way with non-residential. Our farmers and our small businesses need help. Treating them the same way that you treat large multinational corporations or oil and gas interests or big companies makes no sense. At a time in this country when 91 of the Fortune 500 companies in this country didn't pay any federal tax last year, and that kind of abuse of the system flows down to the states, treating everybody the same makes no sense. Let's come up with different categories, let's slice and dice it, and if we need to during this economic downturn, the legislature has the option of pushing out when the next assessment of property is going to be.
All right, two quick things. I mean, you covered a lot of ground, so I want to give
a lot of ground to cover.
I want to give Jack and Kent a chance to respond to your points, and then they'll have a chance to respond to Dennis's. But Jack, I'm going to ask you a legislative question since you are the legislator in the room. So some of the things that Clay suggested about creating some kind of diversification in how people are assessed, or does the legislature actually, under the Constitution, given that Gallagher is a constitutional amendment, even have the authority, the power to do that?
Well, that's a great question. Certainly, any kind of new tax scheme would require the repeal of these constitutional provisions, and that's the first step, obviously. Now, myself, and I know many other tax policy folks like tax parity and like tax stability, and so I don't know really if creating a myriad of progressive tax schemes based on the nature of the taxpayer makes sense. I've been participating in some tax policy roundtable discussions with the governor, and generally speaking, the idea is to try to get rid of different tax treatment for all different types of taxpayers and get to a simpler tax parity scheme. Now, I want to address a couple things that were mentioned that kind of like raised my eyebrows, to say that my friend KT's introductory remarks were political rhetoric, and then to go right into saying, oh, this is a tax increase, and then even I think I heard the word dog whistle thrown in there. That made me laugh a little bit. The practical reality, and these are the facts, and this goes back to many, many years of data we have now, is that the Gallagher Amendment has resulted in higher taxes, not lower taxes, and not taxpayer protection. That certainly obviously was not the original intention, but that is actually now a retroactive analysis. Recently, the NFIB, along with some other business groups, did a study that showed that not only will automatic mill levies react to a Gallagher Amendment inspired reduction in assessment rates by putting $250 million of tax burden on businesses. They also note that the Gallagher Amendment effect is not a single year effect, it's really a multi-year effect. Over 3 years, they've estimated, based on past data, that we'll see a $900 million tax increase, really all going to the business community, that will be inspired by what the Gallagher Amendment does to the tax base, affecting all the tax jurisdictions we're talking about. And so the reality is, I think Coloradans want tax fairness, tax parity, and common sense, and don't want a $900 million tax increase over the next 2 to 4 years. Remember, we're dealing with a system that affects things over multiple years, not just one single year.
All right, now I'm confused, because Clay's saying, on the one hand, that if the amendment, if Gallagher is repealed, and I'll just use the word Gallagher if that's okay with you, Dennis. If Gallagher is repealed, we're looking at a $451 million tax increase. You're saying if Gallagher is not repealed, we're looking at a $900 million tax increase. That's a $1.3, $1.4 billion gap. Someone needs to explain that to me.
And Aaron, I'd be happy to. I think what the senator is saying is that, first of all, the $450.5 million decrease in residential homeowner taxes isn't my number. That's the tax administrator of the state of Colorado's number. And the 29%.
So you're saying if Gallagher is kept in place, it saves?
It will. Homeowners will pay more because, yes, their assessment rate is currently 7.15%. According to the tax administrator, in the next cycle, that assessment rate is supposed to go down to 5.88.
And what was it originally when this amendment passed? What was the assessment rate? Does anybody know?
21%.
So
It was
basically
It was
what
30% is my understanding.
21 and 29% were the initial
We have
places.
different facts.
21% for residential,
But
29%.
prior to the amendment, it was 30 and 29.
So what Gallagher has done, so when this came into being, and Dennis, this was your original, the 55%, 45% ratio, 55% commercial, so revenue would 55% would come from commercial, retail, businesses, 45% from residential. And so you had 29% rate for that category, 21% for residential. And so what the amendment has done, in effect, is it keeps ratcheting down the residential portion. So we've gone now from a 21% rate over these 40 years, and correct me if I have these numbers wrong, to currently a 7.15% rate. And with rising values, that if Gallagher stays on the books, that rate will continue to go down. Is that a fair statement, gentlemen?
Yes.
In this proposal, my understanding, after going from 21% to 7.15%, the repeal of the Gallagher amendment would result in the 7.15% being frozen at that level. Is that correct?
That's correct. You were asking about tax rates. And the one thing I would note is that the 29% on tax on non-residential, on businesses and corporations, hasn't changed in the 38 years that the Gallagher Amendment has been in place. And while that number may seem high, the ratio of 55% non-residential to 45% residential in tax collections has stayed constant. And that constant amount has led to a 62% increase in taxes in the last 10 years across the state of Colorado. So it's not like taxes have been going down. They've actually been going up because residential property has been going up so much. And it's not like businesses paying any more than they have 38 years ago. They're paying the exact same percentage. So those things haven't changed.
Aaron, Clay brings up a number of interesting points for a different discussion, because here we're talking about what is actually happening in our state at this point. And the fact is, if Gallagher is not repealed, there's going to be $200 to $300 million of automatic increases in local taxes and about $600 million in cuts to services. In the half of Colorado that didn't ask for those cuts, didn't vote for those cuts, that's the practical reality of what will happen. And on the small business side, this is not some theoretical point. There are small businesses across our state right now that are closing, that are letting people go. To add another significant tax increase on those real businesses would be horrific. I happen to chair something called the Colorado Gap Fund. We've raised over $30 million to do loans and grants to small businesses to keep them alive. We got 5,600 applications in the first 3 weeks. If you read 20 or 30 of these, your heart would break at what these small businesses are trying to do to survive and what they're having to do sometimes with the employees they treasure to survive. This is the practical reality, and this is the kind of tragedy that will happen if we don't repeal this unsustainable policy.
But Kent, that doesn't seem to make any sense, because the 29% rate is the 29% rate. Will there be less taxes collected in the next cycle? Yes, there will, because we're in the midst of a global pandemic and one of the largest economic downturns in this country's history. So values on businesses, on oil and gas interests, are going down. So that will be less taxes raised. You're correct. But the rate won't change at all. And I think that government needs to treat itself the same way that we treat ourselves. You know, if you're stuck inside for the last 7 months and can't work, or your business has gone away, because of this economic downturn, you have to tighten your belt. And that's what we expect of our government as well, is that sometimes you have to take care of meeting your budgetary obligations even when it's tough. The problem about not being able to go back up, that's a Tabor problem, not a Gallagher problem. And if this first run at doing tax reform had been around the Tabor Amendment and one of its tenets, that would have made sense. Starting with homeowners is unconscionable.
All right, Jack, why don't you jump in? And then Dennis, I need to give you a chance to speak, but Jack, quick response. And because we're running out of time, I'm going to ask everybody to try to shorten your responses, but hit the key points.
Thank you, Aaron. I think to conflate Tabor in this is kind of disingenuous, because Tabor only had an effect maybe 3 times over the last 30 years, and we'd still be at the same assessment rates we are today, even if there were no Tabor. Secondly, I just have to observe antagonists of Amendment B are constantly conflating the assessment rates with the actual tax rates. The tax rates are at the local level, passed by voters to bring in a certain amount of revenue for their hospitals, fire trucks, schools, and businesses and homeowners plan accordingly with a certain tax burden. Again, the issue is not related to the assessment rate for businesses. The issue is what happens when we come in with a heavy hand of government from the state perspective, through all the different the heterogeneity of local taxing jurisdictions, pull the rug out from their tax base after the fact, which then causes real taxes to go up, which are the mill levies, which are passed at the local level, which transfer the tax burden time and time again to the non-residential sector. The Gallagher Amendment, at the end of the day, is a tax burden shifting mechanism. And if the antagonists of Amendment B really want the businesses to pay the entire property tax burden, then I get where they're coming from, and then they should be voting no on Amendment B. But I think KT and myself and my colleagues in the Senate and the House understand that that's not sustainable, that's not fair, and stability and keeping things frozen is the common sense approach for everybody.
So Dennis, I'd like your thoughts on this, and let me ask a basic question going back 40 years, which is, why did we need this at all? Why, there's a certain, I mean, as a layperson, kind of my sense is, why don't we tax all real estate value equally?
Well, Aaron, the reason we have the Gallagher Amendment in the first place is because there was a property tax revolution in the air, and the people of Colorado were ready to go the California model, Proposition 13, which would have been even worse than Gallagher, from what I'm hearing you gentlemen describe. And it's true, the purpose of Gallagher was to make sure that homeowners, middle class, working class homeowners in the state of Colorado had some protection when it came to business versus residential taxes being paid. And when Senator Ron Stewart and I, Aaron, offered the Gallagher Amendment, there was not one lobbyist down there for the homeowners. They were all special lobbyists for the business interests, and the business interests are always going to have paid lobbyists who are able to defend their interests, and that was exactly what went on when I offered the Gallagher Amendment. And you'll remember, Gallagher was before Tabor, and then Tabor came along, and the legislature could not automatically backfill where any shortfall because of that, the interplay between Gallagher and Tabor came into being. The legislature could no longer backfill, so they had to go to special votes for the people. And as you know, there are some parts of Colorado that are a little more on the conservative side, and I don't think they'd vote for an increase in the fire department tax if their front door was on fire. I mean, that's just the reality of our diverse state. We're actually 5 different river basins. We probably should be 5 different states if we were going the smaller models that we were doing that. So that's the reason for Gallagher, was to keep people in their homes, make sure that affordable housing wouldn't be the case. And Colorado should not have to be the place where millionaires only can afford their taxes. And let me bring up one other thing, and that is there's a second title which is not discussed much here in this repeal of Gallagher. They talk, Aaron, about the repeal of Gallagher, but there is also a repeal of the 29% rate on business. This is the second topic. And when I was in the legislature, Senator, you could only have one topic per ballot proposal. There's 2 topics in this, and if this passes, I have a notion to bring this to court to make sure that people realize that there was 2 topics. No one has asked me about that repeal of the 29% business rate, and that is a second topic. Any lawyers out there want to help me out on this?
Aaron, this issue can get overly complicated and overly technical. In fact, the reality is quite simple. It is great that we pay the 3rd lowest property tax rate residentially in America. That's why Amendment B freezes that, protects it. That's why Tabor is there to prevent anyone from increasing your rate, residential or commercial. But let's look at what would happen if you move that 7.1 rate a bit lower. Who gets almost all the benefit? The well-to-do high-growth communities, particularly Denver and Boulder. whose services are cut and tax collections are cut? The rest of Colorado. And so you're giving more money to someone with a second home in Aspen and taking away money from someone who's running a bike shop in Pueblo or a restaurant in Durango. This is just not fair. It is just not what Colorado stands for. And we're now asking these people to pay 4 times the rate for the same dollar of property value. There's nothing to celebrate there by moving that from 4 times higher to 5 times higher. That's not a tax management victory. That's a defeat for our society. It's a defeat for our community. So let's not get lost in the technical jargon. The real world impact on the citizens of Colorado is unambiguously negative.
So, I'd be really interested, Dennis, just quickly in your thought that on one of those points, which is if I'm an owner of a $5 million house, Gallagher really helps me tremendously compared to what your focus was 40 years ago, was someone in 40 years ago, someone in a $50,000 house or a $75,000 house, or today that house would be, a $250,000 or $300,000 house. Why should we help people with multi-million-dollar homes?
Well, let me respond this way to that question. The property tax and tax reform should be comprehensive across the board, not just placing the new burden on the homeowners. And that's exactly what this does. And I can see why Mr. Thury is supporting this, because the business sector is going to make out very well on this proposal when the legislature realizes that they have the power now to lower that business rate. You watch, it's going to be like the comments of Thomas Jefferson when he talked about George III. He hath sent hither swarms of officers to eat us out of our store. And that's exactly what the legislature is going to have presented to them. The number of lobbyists that are going to be down there demanding the lowering of that business rate is going to be overwhelming, and that's why a lot of people are not for this. I think long-term comprehensive reform of the whole tax thing, not just on the backs of the homeowners and the middle class in this state. Jack,
Please respond to that. And I'm also interested in I know we don't have time probably to discuss this topic, but I would guess majority of people are interested in long-term tax reform of some kind. But as Clay pointed out as well, between Tabor, Gallagher, Amendment 23, which affects education and requires certain contributions to K through 12 education, that Gordian knot is difficult to untangle. It strikes me, Dennis, that, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like this is taking an approach of trying to tackle one piece at a time, and it's your piece, so you probably would rather see it be last. But Jack and Kent, do you guys want to quickly respond to what Dennis said?
Well, thank you, Aaron. The Gordian knot metaphor is a little overblown. As I mentioned earlier, Tabor have only interacted in assessment rates, I believe, 3 times over 30 years. We'd still be at the place we are today without Tabor. And I do agree with Senator Gallagher. We do need comprehensive tax reform. And I know many of my colleagues in the legislature are interested in that area. But it has to start with repealing things out of the Constitution so we can have those discussions. And nothing's more difficult to channel your lobbyist anxiety is trying to come up with a new plan or a new solution while at the same time you're trying to do a repeal. The whole effort then would sink under the weight of all the different interests at hand. So that's why I think for my colleagues it makes sense for us to do a repeal now to provide time and stop the bleeding by which comprehensive tax reform can happen. And I know from my perspective, a lot of folks like the idea of the stability of freezing where we are now, moving forward from a place where we are today as being a good place, and letting fire districts be able to pay the lease on their fire trucks or equipment, letting hospitals be able to pay for their imaging technology, letting schools be funded, and letting businesses be able to move forward from a planning basis at the tax rates they are now. It really affects everyone positively just to stay where we are today without having the Constitution come change things that affect different people in different ways throughout Colorado.
Jack, since you're the legislator in the room, let me ask you a quick question. Why not give businesses a different form of relief? For example, in Colorado, we have the business personal property tax, which actually, by I think all calculations, actually costs businesses more to implement than what they pay. Why not give businesses tax relief instead by saying, let's get rid of the business personal property tax?
Well, that's a great idea, Aaron, and I think those things will be on the table. My general observation is that right now, maybe unlike 40 years ago, the General Assembly is not necessarily pro-business right now, and a lot of the legislation is really can be seen as increasing costs on business. When KT and I are championing repealing the Gallagher amendment and saying yes, vote on Amendment B, it's not to provide tax relief for businesses. It's really about stopping the bleeding for everybody. This is a triage effort of trying to say, let's stay where we are, let's freeze things where we are, by which then we can get back to growing our economy. And when we grow our economy, that's a rising tide that floats all boats. Businesses, jobs, homeowners paying their bills, as well as the government who needs tax revenue.
All right, well, I know we're running out of time. I want Clay, I'm going to ask everybody to do a quick pitch. Clay, why should we vote? If I'm a voter watching this program, why should I vote against Amendment B?
I think that the alternatives are clear. There is no ambiguity on this. Tax reform has been proposed for the state of Colorado, but they want to start it with the homeowners of the state. And those homeowners would, according to the tax administrator, will spend $450.56 million more every single year than they otherwise would. If homeowners want to fund tax districts, their library tax, their cultural districts, their fire departments need more, that's what local elections are for. And we all talk about wanting local control, except for somehow this doesn't fit into that. Keep the money in your pocket. Don't be fooled by them talking about tax rates. That's probably the most offensive thing about Amendment B, is they talk tax rates because they won't be honest with you of saying this is going to cost you more than you otherwise would pay.
Thank you, Clay. Dennis, why should I vote no on Amendment B?
Well, Aaron, I want to congratulate Mr. Vigoda on his usual excellent performance on explaining why you should vote no. And I hope everybody that hears my voice realizes I'm asking him to vote no on this because I think the legislature was a little mistrustful of the people. They didn't trust the people. They're sort of like Trump in the White House when they said, oh my gosh, I don't want to let them know there's a pandemic going on out there, they might panic. The state of Colorado has lived through droughts and the wars, and the people can handle the truth. And the truth is, the legislature should have said, we need more money for our costs of government, and here's what we're asking you to fork over in taxes. It's going to be a tax increase, and here's about how much it is per tax household. That's when you have a trust of the people, that's where this falls down, in my view, and I hope everybody will vote no.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Jack, I'm going to let you go next, and Kent gets the last word.
I'm on team trust in the people, and that's why I support Tabor. In our local jurisdictions, citizens of Colorado have voted affirmatively for certain tax measures, and those tax measures are meant to pay for fire engines, fire departments, hospitals, you name it. Then the heavy hand of the state comes after the fact and pulls the rug out of an election that citizens have already voted for, and an antagonist of Amendment B would then say, well, then you need to run your election again to go get the voters to approve the tax measure you just had approved a few years ago so you can pay for this stuff. Makes no sense. Again, that's why the Gallagher Amendment has proved to be an unwieldy, heavy hand, and we just got to get back to saying, hey, let's freeze where we are. Things are good, as my friend KT has pointed out so eloquently, And let's get back to rebuilding our economy and getting funding in businesses, jobs, and then ultimately so we can fund the government services we need.
All right, Kent, you get the last word.
We feel so strongly that the people of Colorado should vote yes on Amendment B and repeal the Gallagher Amendment because it is outdated, it is unfair, and it is destructive. And even the people on the other side of this issue concede that it really hurts small business in a way that matters, that it really does hurt the other half of Colorado that doesn't have a growing population, that doesn't have home values going up, and suddenly their tax collection revenues plummet, not because of anything they voted for, not because of anything they asked for, but because of what's going on in the most populous parts of the state. It's fundamentally unfair. There is no victory in taking the third lowest residential rates and making them second lowest when the price you pay is that the other half of Colorado is hurting, shutting down businesses, shutting down hospital wings, closing down ambulance runs. It's simply not fair. This is common sense in the end. It's not a technical argument. This is about what we're doing to our fellow citizens in our state and what we need to do in order to incite an economic recovery, which will be the tide that raises all boats. I actually worry that our opponents could be right and property taxes could be lower for a terrible reason, that the absence of an economic recovery reduces everyone's home values so much that yes, their tax goes down because their home value went down by 50 times more. That's no tax victory.
All right, I want to thank my guests, Kent Thiry, Jack Tate, Clay Vagoda, and Dennis Gallagher. Make sure you watch all of our election programs on the Aaron Harber Show, Election 2020, and you can listen to our podcast, so please encourage everyone to do that. Most importantly, make sure you get your vote in by 7 p.m. on Tuesday, November 3rd. Thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Aaron, host of the Aaron Harber Show. Right now, everyone is stressed out, and some people really need extra support. This is the time to reach out to family, friends, and others. And if you or someone you know needs help or is in crisis, please contact any of these agencies. There are many people waiting to assist you and anyone else who needs help in these difficult times. Please don't hesitate to reach out now to help yourself and others.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again. Hi, I'm Aaron, host of the Aaron Harber Show here on Channel 3. As part of our Stop Scam series, I want to remind everyone con artists will try to get your money any way they can. If an offer sounds too good to be true, it probably is not true. Here are some security tips. Don't answer calls or texts from anyone you don't know. Government agencies will never call to ask for personal information or money. Do not give out your Social Security or Medicare numbers. credit card or bank account information, or passwords. Government payments never need to be confirmed in advance. A prize you won which requires a payment is a scam. Never send money or gift cards to someone you don't know. Look carefully at email addresses so you aren't tricked into thinking it's legitimate, and don't open emails from anyone you don't know. Delete all emails which ask you to log in to an account, and protect yourself by visiting these websites. Hi, I'm Aaron Harber. The goal of my show is to inform viewers about a diverse range of topics, from our country's leadership to economic and tax policies to energy and environmental issues, with the participation of the most significant stakeholders in each arena. Our long-form approach gives each guest the time to fully speak his or her mind, and gives the audience all the facts, allowing everyone to draw their own conclusions.
Thank God you do your homework, and just doing what you do is enough to begin to let them know what's happening.
I strive to bring together guests with perspectives from across the entire political spectrum to promote problem resolution through civil discourse.
Keith Olbermann and Glenn Beck and Rush Babe, frightening people and using emotion, fear, guilt, and racism. What a bunch, from the right and the left.
I've personally experienced our democratic system from the inside, and I use my knowledge and expertise on the show to get clarification of major points and expand the discussion to ensure my audience gets the uncut truth.
What is this bigotry against a third-party candidate? Do the two parties own all the voters and everyone else should shut up and stand in line?
We were on the campus together at Princeton University. Her Majesty does not look any different than she did in those days, and I wish I could say the same about myself. I'm an ardent supporter of transparency in government and strive to play an active role in bringing out all the facts related to our nation's most challenging issues.
One of the things I've learned in life, and you certainly have learned from doing your show, is you got smart people, but they're torn apart, they're polarized. You get into a media environment where it's not things like your show, but the shout shows on talk radio or cable TV, in which there's just this tendency to score political points and be polarized.
Since my days in national talk radio, I've upheld a tradition of being truly nonpartisan, something which seems rare on the airwaves today.
Depending on your point of view, a decision of the Supreme Court might be the wrong one.
I've also found my guests talk to others involved in our nation's leadership, and they have encouraged them to come on the program as well.
We are not final because we're infallible. We are infallible because we're final. Now, no one knows what that means.
But it sounds good.
No, but what it
sounds
means
good.
is we do not have the last word because we are so brilliant. We are, of course, brilliant, but only in the sense that somebody has to have the last word.
It's the focus on issues rather than personal attacks that makes guests comfortable and gives them the chance to tell their entire story. I simply let guests explain their perspective completely, then dig deeper for the audience by drawing from my own knowledge and experience.
Democracy succeeds when you're giving more and more things to people, but the years ahead, we're going to have to ask more of them in taxes and expect less from government.
There doesn't seem to be anyone in either party that has any kind of appetite for asking more of people tax-wise. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're probably right, and that's a flaw in democracy.
Thanks for taking the time to check out the show. I hope this has been helpful in illustrating the nation's need for a balanced, nonpartisan program to shed light on today's issues. For more information, please go to www.harbertv.com or email producer@harbertv.com. And thanks for watching.